We're good. Can I get a thumbs up from the panelists to see if they can hear? Excellent. Welcome everyone to session 2 of Legislative Action Day, hosted by AFP Austin, but obviously encompassing the whole state. Again, thanks for joining as we learn more about the intersection of philanthropy, advocacy and legislation, and where and how you guys plug in. As I said, this is session 2, the Texas nonprofit sector, economic impact, COVID-19 and building a collective voice. My name is Ryan Ginard. I will be hosting this session for the next hour and a bit. I know it's just after lunch, but I can assure you there's some great information coming that will help you digest it and obviously digest some more. My day job is the Director of Development at UT Computer Science Department. I'm also on the Legislative Affairs Committee here at AFP Austin. And just to kind of tie it all up before we announce and introduce our speakers, today's session again will be how nonprofits play a significant role in our communities and in our state's economic landscape. This session, we're going to see the United Ways of Texas and OneStar Foundation taking you really on a journey to empower you and your organization to stand for your mission and your communities, obviously helping those you serve as well. We're going to get a lot of data. As someone who moved to Texas about 1.5 years ago, there is so much here that is going to inform your work moving forward and is going to be super useful for building grants out in the future as well. They're going to take a look at how COVID-19 has impacted the sector in Texas, discuss the importance of building a collective voice on nonprofit issues, and they're going to highlight the advocacy steps you can take to raise your voice on behalf of Texas nonprofits. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our amazing speakers for today's session. We have Sarah Richards, who's the Director of Community Affairs at the OneStar Foundation. Some background on Sarah. She provides leadership of programs at OneStar that strengthen Texas communities by building the capacity of the Texas nonprofit sector. This includes the Built for Texas initiative, something you're going to learn a lot more about in today's session, which is a collaboration aiming to educate policymakers about the value of our nonprofit sector. Additionally, Sarah leads OneStar's advocacy for federal and state policies and procedures that promote national service, volunteerism, and disaster resilience, something that Texas has obviously seen quite a lot of in the past year. She previously worked as Executive Director of the Colorado River Alliance and she was a Program Director for Keep Texas Beautiful. Sarah holds a master's degree in education from Texas State and a bachelor's degree in psychology from the UT of Texas Austin. The other presenter is Molly Weiner. She's the Director of Nonprofit Engagement at the United Ways of Texas. At the United Ways, Molly engages with nonprofits to build their collective voice and advocate for the sector. She previously worked as Director of Policy and Advocacy for Texas Aspires, promoting cross-sector partnerships to improve education opportunities for Texas children. She serves on the board of directors of the Urban Leaders Fellowship Program. She holds a master's degree in public policy from Vanderbilt and a bachelor's degree in business admin and psychology from the UT of Texas Austin. Again, you're going to learn a lot here, so get those questions ready and feel free to put them in the Q&A chat function. At the end, we're going to have a bit more discussion so we can link everything you've learned and again, to tap into the expertise of two amazing women here in the Texas nonprofit landscape. So take it away.
All right, y'all, so we are really excited to be here. And like Ryan said, this work has been 2-3 years kind of in the making now, this partnership between OneStar and the United Ways of Texas, really trying to think about what a statewide, what the nonprofit sector and landscape looks like statewide, and how we can work to strengthen those relationships, strengthen kind of our collective voice, so to really push for the organizational, the capacity building needs of our sector. We know that our state continues to look to nonprofits to step up. I think the pandemic has been a great example, but even prior to that, that nonprofits have really stepped up in communities to fill critical services and roles. And our sector has needs as well that we think policymakers at the local and state level need to know about. So kind of building that advocacy capacity voice. So that's what we're here today to kind of talk about, to leave kind of maybe the individual issues that each of our organizations deal with on a regular basis that directly benefit our clients, our communities, and kind of think about the sector as a whole, the needs of nonprofits statewide. And so we've got some really interesting data to dive into, to talk about some regional differences, some fundraising differences, all these kind of different parts that make up the nonprofit landscape in the state. So I will turn it over to Sarah to take us through the first part of that data.
Great. Okay. Well, it is wonderful to be here with you. And I see some friends in the audience. Well, I don't really see you, but I know that you're there. Debbie Tate from the Center for Child Protection. I don't know if you remember, worked with you ages ago. And Suzanne Coe from Keep Texas Beautiful, where I used to work, is here as well. So thrilled to see some friendly faces out there, and really excited to be speaking about something that is really important to OneStar Foundation, as I know it is to United Ways of Texas, and to all of you as well. And that's serving our communities across Texas as best as we can. And they need us. We bring a lot to the table to serve them. And by coming together as one voice, we can help best serve the communities that matter so much to each of us. And if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide, my main role in this presentation is to dazzle you with data, which I'm going to try really hard to do rather than bore you with data. And since Molly, Ryan, and I are all former Longhorns or UT alum, I think it's very fitting that we have a Longhorn on this slide. Let's kick this off by just seeing what the collective knowledge is of the folks that are joining us here today. We're going to begin digging into some of the data we've collected with a few polls. And I'll go ahead and launch these polls now, which I think it should be showing on your screen. Thumbs up from my panelists if it is. No? Okay, well, that didn't work. Let's hit the button. Maybe I have to relaunch. Okay, here we go. Is it showing now? It's green, I think. Awesome. Okay, I think most of the folks in the audience probably do a pretty good job of guessing this one because, you know, you're fundraisers, or many of you are. In a typical recent year, how much money did Texans give to charity? See some answers coming in. Give it a little longer here. And I should say, this first set of data that I'll be walking through with you is pre-pandemic. It's different data sets from 2015, roughly 2015 to 2018 that were gathered and analyzed and that were used for a report that I'll outline in a little bit. We have some pretty good guesses there. Let me go ahead and give a couple more seconds for anyone else. Okay, we'll end this poll and I'll say nice job. Folks, you got really close there. The answer guessed most commonly was 22 billion. The answer is actually 16 billion is the correct answer. The total varies somewhat from year to year, but in 2016, 15.9 billion. That's 3.6% of household income was given to charity by Texans, which is a pretty incredible number. Let's go ahead and move to our next poll. We have just a few of these, and this one is also in our fundraising realm here. So I'm imagining some pretty good guesses by this group, and that's true or false. From 2000 to 2010, the nonprofit, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong poll here. The typical American household supports how many charitable organizations per year? That was some pretty quick answers that came in that are quite strong. Give it a couple more seconds. Okay, let's see. It looks like the most common guess was 3 to 4, and the correct answer is 5 to 10. So this actually surprised me. I think my original guess had been in the 3 to 4 realm as well, but the typical American household supports between 5 and 10 organizations per year, which is a fair amount. I don't know, I don't have the data handy of how much, you know, if it's that dollar amount breaks out across those 10 and 5 to 10, unfortunately. Okay, let's look at the next poll. Okay. So we're moving away from dollars in to some just data about the Texas sector here and in the United States as well. So from 2000 to 2010, the nonprofit sector grew faster in terms of employees and wages than the government and business sectors. Is this one true or false? Some quick answers. Okay. Go ahead and stop it there. Half of you, or I'm sorry, five of you correctly guessed true. Yes, the nonprofit sector grew more than both of these sectors between 2000 and 2010. We'll look at some specific Texas data on that in just a little bit. Let me move to the next one. We're making our way through. This is another true or false. Those are the easy ones, easier ones. True or false, US nonprofit sector contributes almost 100 billion to the nation's economy, making it the size of the 20th largest economy in the world. Again, nice job answering that quickly. Let's go ahead and stop this poll. Look at the results. Congratulations. Actually, no, not congrats. We all got it wrong. The answer is false, but I feel like this one's a bit of a trick question. I think the dollar amount is correct. The 100 billion is correct, but that would actually make it the 16th largest economy in the world as opposed to the 20th. So even more impressive. And then our last one for now. Let's go here. Another true and false. Nationwide, the average nonprofit employer has more employees than the average for-profit business. This is true or false? Okay, looks like we're divided on this one a little bit. And the answer is actually true. Nationwide, nonprofit employers do have more employees than average for-profit businesses at 37 to 20 employees respectively, which is quite a low number on both for both for-profit and nonprofit, I believe. Okay, well, thank you for participating in polls and bearing with me as I manage through them. We can go ahead and move to the next slide, please, Molly. So why data? Why are we providing you data on the nonprofit sector? Why are we here to even encourage you to stand for our missions together? What would the communities we serve really gain? Why should the nonprofit sector have a seat at the table? Well, all of this is really about strengthening how we tell our collective story for our communities. I think the data will show you, and from what you probably already know about our sector, that it is clear that we are powerful. We serve a critical importance to the state and to Texans. And by coming together, we can be more powerful and more impactful for those that we do serve. So that's really what led United Ways of Texas and OneStar to work together to develop Built for Texas. This report, I actually have a paper copy of it here. You can get it online, and we'll share that website in just a little bit. But we came together in around 2018, recognizing that Texas was missing something that many other states in our country have. States like Alaska, Maine, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Georgia, Arizona, you name it. Many states were working together as a sector in partnership with national partners like the National Council, coming together to use data, find data, collect data, and use it to increase their visibility, find commonality commonalities and justify a greater role in decision-making that affects their communities. And we knew that Texas's nonprofit sector could certainly do it too. That led to the birth of this report and to a series of conversations that we've been having with organizations across the state about how we are the trusted partner of the communities that we represent, and we can advocate on their behalf together. So the data, we'll go ahead and move to the next slide and dig in on this. I know it probably doesn't surprise anyone in the room here today that there are a lot of nonprofits in Texas, but how many exactly? Well, there are over 100,000 nonprofits in Texas. You can see the breakdown here. This breaks them out by the National Taxonomy of Exempt Entities stats, which is what the IRS uses to classify nonprofit organizations. And what this represents, yes, obviously an awful lot of numbers, but there's a lot of weight in the smaller numbers. That small peach chunk over to the right-hand side there, for example, includes hospitals and higher education institutions, which have a relatively small number of organizations in our state, but hold a large portion of the influence, the assets, and the revenue that our sector sees. So move on to the next slide, which tells a little bit more about, of these, over 100 organizations, where are they? How are they divided across this massive state with tremendous diversity and difference across it? Well, some of this isn't going to be too surprising to you. We see a higher percentage of nonprofits in our larger metro areas. Dallas-Fort Worth, for example, has almost 30%. The Houston area has 19, and then some of us in the capital city right now, and we would be if post-pandemic, we would be doing this legislative action day at the Capitol. In the Austin area, where do we stand? 9%. But if you look at that Austin, San Antonio, Central Texas region combined, that's about 23% of the organizations in the state. So this is where nonprofits are, but where's the money? The next slide shows us that. You see the same breakdown of region, but you can also see, if you remember some of the numbers from the last slide, some interesting differences that really pop out here. Well, in total, our state's nonprofits collectively have more than 300 billion in assets. And this revenue is not surprisingly concentrated, again, just like the nonprofits are concentrated in our larger urban areas. However, what you see here is some differences really starting to build in. So the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where 29% of the organizations are based, 33% of the overall revenue is associated with organizations from this region. Similarly, with the Houston region, where that was represented 19% of nonprofits, we see 28% of the revenue in the Houston region. And then that Central Texas area that I mentioned, you also see that a little bit here too. The number's a bit more standard. So not quite as much of the discrepancy between number of organizations and wealth kind of in the San Antonio, Austin areas you start to see in our other major metro areas. The next slide takes it just a couple levels deeper. This is some really fascinating information. So I want to unpack all of it here. So knowing the number of nonprofits is great, but per capita really tells us a lot more. Per 1,000 people, how many nonprofits are there? Well, this slide shows you what the per capita number was back in 2004 and how that's compared to 2014. So, first thing you notice is kind of per capita, when you look, especially back in 2004, you really don't see that per capita growth, or you don't see the greater numbers in our major metro areas, which actually I think surprised me. And even in the 2014 slide, it's fascinating. You really don't see this high concentration when you look at the per capita numbers up in the Dallas-Fort Worth region that we saw in the earlier slide, which is fascinating. However, you do see a higher concentration in the Austin, San Antonio, Central Texas area. What this also shows you, though, is we're pretty young. The number doesn't come through on the slide, but 51% of Texas nonprofits were established after the year 2000. So those 51 aren't even, or what, they turned 21 this year. So what does this mean? Well, we know that there's a direct correlation between the age of a nonprofit and the size of a nonprofit's operating budget. Young nonprofits have small operating funding. You know, they're stretched thin. It's challenging to deliver services. I think it's also important to point out that a third of Texas's nonprofits, so over 34,000, are considered grassroots organizations by GuideStar's definition, meaning that they have under $1 million budget. So it's a third of nonprofits. And of those, 10% in total of Texas nonprofits have budgets under 50,000. So we're talking about a lot of organizations that really do have limited capacity. And what does this really mean about our communities and our ability to serve the communities when so many of our nonprofits have limited resources? And then on the flip side, let's look at the impact that nonprofits have on the economy here in Texas. And I think this is what is most surprising and incredible to me. We brought in Dr. Ray Perryman of the Perryman Group to do an economic impact analysis, and he discovered that Texas nonprofits employ over 540,000 people, and 1 in 8 Texas jobs are either in the nonprofit sector or tied to the nonprofit sector. So what does this mean? We truly are pretty powerful if we can come together and those individual capacity challenges that some of the smaller nonprofits might feel, if we can come together, we can help support and advocate for the issues that are important to those organizations, as well as our larger, more robust ones. So moving to the next slide, this is another really exciting statistic to see. Economic impact is anticipated to continue. The job gains number is really strong looking out to 2028. Why shouldn't our voice be listened to when we really are a powerful force for the state of Texas and for the economy? And the next slide actually dives in by region to look at the economic benefits of nonprofit entities by region. So you really see here not just the permanent jobs that are established through nonprofits, but the goods and services and the product that exists because of our activity and our work across the state and in these various communities. We help communities thrive, run, and help people have meaningful lives where individuals are contributing to their communities, and we can connect givers and receivers to one another for the betterment of our communities. So that's some of the data. We'll go to my last little slide here for now. Would really like to know anything that surprised you, anything that hits home for you. What does this data mean for you and for your organization? Feel free to drop that in the chat box. I'll be coming back to you later after Molly talks with you to tell you a little bit more about what we saw with the sector with COVID-19. Some of the data that we found from the sector through the pandemic. I'll just check the chat box here. Not seeing anything jump out yet, except I'm glad Debbie remembers me, which makes me very happy. Hi, Debbie. So yes, great data. There's more in the report. You should definitely check it out online. With that, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Molly.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm excited to continue this and dive in a little more. And before kind of we get to the current reality of what our nonprofit sector is facing with the pandemic and kind of what the future may hold. Just want to take a second to kind of reflect on what the data kind of tells us about the power our sector has, like Sarah talked about. And I think that the data makes a compelling case to all of us as nonprofit staff and leaders about why we need to leverage that collective power to advocate for the needs of the sector, just like other industries do. And having been in and around advocacy in the Texas legislature for many years now, there are strong, powerful influences at the Capitol that really kind of bring the needs of different industries to legislators, and to have a presence like that for the nonprofit sector beyond just kind of the issues that we all care about and work so hard on, I think is a really important part, that as nonprofit leaders, our understanding of community, our voice has power and it has strength and it matters in these conversations, that nonprofits should have a seat at all of these decision-making tables, because we are the ones that are doing much of the direct service work, that are doing much of the interaction and the building of community. And so we often tell, when we have these conversations, we like to remind people, and I think that sometimes when you're wrapped up in your mission and work, you forget that you're an expert on community, and all of these elected officials, they need to hear from you. And I tell this all the time when people come to Capitol, they actually do want to hear from you. They really want to know what's happening in their communities, how policies will affect their communities. They want that perspective. And so knowing that as a sector, our voices can create change that will benefit our organizations, our communities, and the work that we do that we care about. And so there are many, many policy sayings and metaphors around tables and how they explain what this works like. But really, I think one of the most apt is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that's what we've seen recently in the nonprofit sector, is that oftentimes kind of the needs of our sector will go unmet unless we raise our voices about that. And so these policymakers at the city level, at the county level, at the state, are making decisions that impact us. They decide, they make the budget, right? The state legislature is going through budget making right now. They decide which services and programs that they're going to cut, which ones they're going to fund at last year's levels, which ones they're going to add money or capacity to. They're making all those decisions, and that affects kind of our operations and our work on the ground. And so for us, we think that the presence of nonprofits matter, because we know better than anyone how these public policies will impact our communities. And so for us, kind of doing this Built for Texas work, for having these conversations, we think it's kind of our economic and moral imperative to be at this table to advocate. And that kind of means twofold. It means building a coalition. It means raising our voices about the things we need. And it means being a strong partner with government, with policymakers, with leaders, helping to bring collective solutions to difficult challenges in our cities and our communities, and building those relationships, because nonprofits, they have the data, the best practices, the stories, the solutions that are really critical pieces of public policy. And just to kind of drive that home a little bit, like, we can think of some really important examples in the past 2 years about how policy decisions really impact operations. So if you think about something as kind of basic to nonprofit operating is charitable contributions, right? Tax policies at the federal level, who can take a tax exemption, how much, et cetera, can impact nonprofits differently, right? Or small dollar donations treated differently than large dollar ones, or folks who itemize versus who don't. Like, these are all policy decisions that our elected officials make that affect kind of nonprofits' ability to sustain themselves. So it's important that nonprofits are a part of these conversations and explaining how their operations work, how their sustainability works. There are other things that other policies that states have really embarked on that matter. Alabama has really addressed health insurance, which I know is often a big concern for small businesses, both for-profit and nonprofit. And Alabama has recently, in the past couple of years, passed a statute that allows nonprofit staff to purchase health insurance as if they were state employees. And just imagine what something like that could do for our sector if we had kind of an ability to access better health insurance, or to offer these different types of benefits to our staff. Other states, I don't know how many of us on the call have been involved in state contracting, but if you have, I'm sure you have the wounds and the stories to tell of that. At the United Ways, several of our United Ways just went through the 2-on-1 kind of request for proposal from one of the state agencies, and the number of exhibits alone in that request for proposal is enormous. And there's a lot of work that goes into these, and every agency has a different process. There's different paperwork, the pay schedules are different, and nonprofits are expected to navigate all that. They should have input into what these processes look like, how state agencies engage with this work, especially as our state legislature continues to look to nonprofits to provide more of the services that these organizations, to provide more of the services that the state is interested in providing to Texans. So just to kind of think about what are the things we could achieve with this kind of statewide effort that focuses on our sector specifically, right? That helps us advocate for our shared challenges, helps us coordinate around this issue. So I will turn it back to Sarah to say, to talk about what the reality is right now. Then we'll talk through some policy solutions. But I think that what we see is that our organizations may serve different populations. We may tackle different issues, but there are some common challenges. And I know that sometimes this conversation gets a little bit tricky, and normally we'd open this up a little bit and have people share out, what stops us from raising our voices, what prevents us from this advocating. And a lot of times it's capacity, right? As your staff is already overcommitted to all of the things that are going on. A lot of times some nonprofits don't quite know all of the rules of engagement around advocacy and lobbying and all of those different things, or the process seems scary and overwhelming to navigate. So what could it look like if we collectively shared in some of that work to make some of these asks, these collective work, a little bit easier for our nonprofits to engage in? Because when you're up at the Capitol, nobody else is going to do this work on behalf of our sector, right? We have to engage, we have to get involved. And I think that the future of our sector, as we pointed out, it's young, it's growing, that this is going to be a critical piece to make sure that we have strong infrastructure for the work ahead. So I will toss it back over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about we know what the sector looks like, but it looks different. We've gone through a lot of challenge in this past year and where we go from here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I've got more data. I've got data from many of you actually. And before we dig into it, one more poll to just get a feel for what the experience has been like for the organizations participating in this session. So 3 questions, all on this the same poll, I believe, that you should be seeing now. And this is really around the financial viability of your organizations, because this was something of causing a lot of concern and still is for a number of organizations out there. So prior to COVID-19 crisis, what was the financial condition of your organization? And given the current climate or the climate we've experienced, has your condition changed? And then lastly, has your organization had to lay off staff or reduce hours due to the COVID-19 pandemic? See some answers coming through. Give it just another moment. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop it there and take a look. Let's share the results. So it looks like many of you participating now felt that the organization's financial condition was strong prior to the pandemic, and fortunately very little change for the worse, but not too much change. It does look like we didn't have anyone answer significant change for the worse. That's it's incredibly unfortunate. And, also what it doesn't really capture here is the number of organizations that have actually gone out of business due to the pandemic. And then lastly, we did have one person participating with us. They did either have to lay off staff or reduce hours due to the pandemic. So thank you for sharing. I'll stop sharing those results now, and let's take a look at what we learned from a number of nonprofits and nonprofit professionals that completed a survey that 2 surveys, in fact, or 2 rounds of surveys that went out during the pandemic. OneStar and United Ways jointly conducted 2 surveys, one in the kind of, shortly after the pandemic first hit, kicked it off around the March timeframe. Meanwhile, a number of communities across Texas launched local surveys. So we actually we worked with a number of wonderful organizations out there to pull together regional data to look at both the statewide data and regional data and put that into an initial report that came out in August. And then with a group of nonprofits, including Keep Texas Beautiful, who's joining us here today, we put out a statewide survey and pushed it out through a lot of partners to get results later in the year in the fall timeframe, and all of that was compiled and put into a report that came out in December of 2020. So 2 different points within the pandemic last year, some great information. So huge thank you to all of the partners who helped us promote the surveys, and then also to those of you who might have completed the survey on behalf of your organizations. Really helped us have some great data to understand the reality of nonprofits and to be able to share that out with legislators, with our funders, to advocate for our needs. So let's take a look at some of the data, what we discovered. So revenue. Now, I'm sure many of you have been tracking some of the reports that have been coming out about how much money did we see come through the pandemic and where it went. Some great national reports. I was reviewing one by Candid and Center for Disaster Philanthropy just earlier this week. Really showing that generosity was unprecedented, as unprecedented as the pandemic. Some of the key findings from that report were more than 20 billion was awarded for COVID-19 globally in 2020. Human services organizations received the largest share of that funding, around 28%. And one state statistic I was able to pull out of there, while Texas was not among the top 5 states in donations made to organizations for COVID efforts, Texas was the 5th largest, or Texas received the 5th largest amount of funding of states in the country from donations, and it was to the tune of 301,702 gifts. So I thought that was a really interesting stat on Texas. And now, while there definitely was some incredible generosity, what we discovered from respondents to our survey was many of them were facing significant changes in revenue because of COVID-19. And that was really, it cut across the board, everything from in-kind donations, fee-for-service programs that they could not provide. Close to 3/4 of the organizations experienced declines, specifically in individual donations, 3/4 experiencing loss of fee-for-service revenue, over half dealing with revised grant terms and reduced in-kind donations. So pretty significant and across the board for a large number of our nonprofits. Now, the next slide really highlights the impact to our workforce, both our employees and our volunteer workforce. The Johns Hopkins Center for Civil Society Studies found that the U.S. nonprofit sector lost over 930,000 jobs through the crisis, and estimates that it will take about a year and a half. It could take about a year and a half to return to pre-COVID levels of employment. And in Texas, we definitely saw that nonprofits were struggling to maintain the workforce required to deliver on the needs of our communities. This was true both for staff and volunteers. The gray bar on the charts there, you see that 1/4 of organizations had or believe that they were, at the time they took the survey, believed that they would have to lay off employees. So it's 1/4 thought they would have to lay off employees, and over 1/3 had to reduce hours of their employees. And to take it one level deeper, of the respondents who said that they had or would have to lay off employees, those organizations had on average 96 employees. So they had to lay off about a third of their employees. So some significant reductions in workforce that were underway where reductions were required. And the next slide talks about our volunteer workforce. Now, Texas pre-pandemic was already, not winning any awards for our volunteerism. Our rates, just like nationally, have been declining in terms of volunteerism. And Texas was the 37th. We ranked 37th in volunteerism for states in our nation. Well, I mean, not surprisingly, I'm sure as many of you experienced, 58% of nonprofits had to endure severe reductions in volunteer workforce. So many organizations showed such flexibility and adaptability, moving volunteer opportunities to kind of a virtual situation. But this was very challenging, especially for smaller organizations, which you see on the chart to the right here, that these declines in volunteerism had an outsized impact on smaller organizations with budgets under 100,000, who often depend very much on volunteers for service delivery. And we also see the numbers jump for organizations serving outside of our major metro areas. And then on the next slide, a little bit about operational impact. Significant impacts were felt, kind of across the board. 2 out of 3 nonprofits experienced cancellation of major fundraising events, disruption of services to their communities, challenges of staff and volunteers working remotely. And also over half of organizations had to disrupt their advocacy and communications events and had struggled to get the right technology on board to continue providing programs and just for general operations. These numbers jump when we look specifically at organizations outside of our major cities. And a little bit more sustainability. We really, so thank you. The slide here really shows you, and it breaks it out by type of organization, type of leadership of the organizations here. What we see that is really concerning is the ability of our nonprofits be able to continue to meet the needs of community members. This is a big, big worry for so many nonprofit leaders out there. Only 38% of respondents share that without additional support, that they'd be able to continue to operate for over a year. So 38%, more than a third of our organizations don't think they're going to be able to operate for over a year unless they receive additional support. And around 30% of organizations reported that they would only be able to operate for 6 months or less. So you put that together, that's 60% or almost 70% of our organizations that might have to close their doors a year later unless additional help is received. So the next slide, I think, really drives the kind of trifecta of challenge that nonprofits face, which is decreased money coming in, or maybe insecurity around whether money will come in, decreased ability to provide services, all while the demand is actually on the rise because our community's needs are so great right now. Where possible, our organizations were being so flexible and adaptable, shifting to remote venues. However, 44% of clients that nonprofits serve have no digital access. So services had to continue in person, utilizing precautions. So just really putting our organizations in a challenging position. One quote we received from respondent was, our agency has remained open and serving our community throughout the pandemic and went from serving 7,500 individuals a month to more than 12,000 individuals a month. So almost double the amount of support needed. Meanwhile, we saw a number of organizations in the arts and culture space and environmental space, demand go way down because they couldn't, or at least until activities could shift to a virtual environment. So I think it just, understatement of the year, threw us all for a loop. Really challenging, startling that experience that you've all lived alongside us. The next slide. I think the data shows you that our sector is adaptable, flexible, and pushing through to provide critical services under pretty stressful circumstances, and that we need relief and we need support. Do nonprofits feel like they are getting that relief and support? We asked this question, and I think you won't be too surprised to see that 77% of respondents feel like their organization's board of directors are supportive. And I should do a shout out. One of my directors is joining us today, Mary Grace. I'm so glad you're here. our organization's board was incredible for us during the pandemic, and that's pretty consistent across the board. Organizations also feel pretty supported by their nonprofit partners. But then if you look at the numbers a little more closely, you see that it's not so much the case when we look at our elected officials and our corporate partners, just not really having our backs or understanding or appreciating what our needs are. 71%, now this is a stat from after the first round of PPP loans, 71% respondents applied for and were approved for a PPP loan. So that is a pretty strong number. Although organizations that serve low-income individuals, children and youth, and communities of color were more likely to say that they did not qualify for a PPP loan at around 42% of those respondents. As opposed to 47% of other organizations. So I believe that's it for my big data dump, but I encourage you to check out the materials on the website that we'll share with you. It's you can download both the reports. We even have the data that you can download and look at by region if you'd like to dig in and find out a little bit more. But back over to Molly, who's going to say a little bit more about what some of the recommendations were coming out of these reports.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, to just kind of wrap up this part of the conversation, just want to dive in a little bit about what this all means in terms of kind of this statewide, this collective voice that we keep referring to. Like, what actually does that voice ask for at these policymaking tables, right? And what are kind of these key needs? And so based on the Built for Texas report had an original set of recommendations, and those recommendations were refined kind of through our kind of road tour, for lack of a better word, taking this report out on the road to really share with communities what we had found. And then through what we learned from the pandemic, some of these recommendations shifted or became even more important. Access to, right, broadband and digital inclusion became an even more pressing priority than it was before, kind of because of some of the impacts of the pandemic. So we have a set of recommendations that I want to put up here, and they're pretty broad. They're targeted at three main groups, right? Policymakers, philanthropy, and business, kind of key partners in communities. And just kind of want to say that these are broad, but we really kind of work hard to push that advocacy isn't just about like what happens at the legislature, you know, every odd numbered year. We're going to dive into that tomorrow morning. So if you want to come, United Ways has been really involved in tracking bills and following actual legislation that's happening this session. So we'll dive into all of that tomorrow morning. But this is really kind of organizations can band together in their local communities. Cities are moving on a lot of these priorities, school boards, right? All of these different kind of elected official kind of roles and policy making. This stuff, it really matters. And so, right, so these kind of recommendations, they're broadly framed. They're focused on increased investment, flexibility for nonprofits who are operating in complex environments, engagement and support. And often a lot of these recommendations are really pulling in philanthropy and business and our policymakers into the work more deeply to build those really strong relationships, to promote the importance of our sector, to promote charitable giving, volunteerism, all of those things that we know are kind of the lifeblood of the work we do. So you can see kind of some of the big asks. So provide and target additional relief and assistance, right? We know is extra important during COVID. A lot of state agencies they had to make across the board 5% cuts. Some of those cuts still haven't been restored and may not be restored in this budget, which we know is a strain on nonprofits who have state contracts or who rely on kind of supports that the state provides. So that's important. We know that there's a lot of pandemic disaster relief money that's often targeted at small businesses, but that definition is exclusive of small nonprofit businesses. And so making sure that nonprofits have a voice at these decision-making tables that are talking about the impact that they're still having, even under these difficult situations like Sarah was referring to, is really important to be able to elevate those stories of impact. And so these set of recommendations are a part of the report as well. And you can check out all of them online, happy to talk through them all, but really wanted to kind of conclude this part by just saying, like, you can see here that these span all issue areas, they span all kind of different roles nonprofits might play, whether you are a direct service provider, whether you're support organization, whether you're an educational institution, an advocacy group. All of us have these common challenges that we think that this data really shows, the Built for Texas data, but also the pandemic data, right? Our challenges are similar, and that we can, if we really kind of band together as a collective voice for the sector, if we can start to think about ways to elevate some of these challenges, we think that, we know that we can have kind of that broader impact on systems change. And so with that, I will do one more thing. So I will say the report recommendations, these policy ideas, these are long-term goals, right? These are things that won't happen this legislative session necessarily, but they're definitely conversations that the sector wants to have, but there are ways for us all to get involved. And I think we're gonna dive into that a little bit in the Q&A. And I know that the last session talked a little bit kind of the nuts and bolts of interacting with legislators and things like that, but there's tons of ways for nonprofits to start this work and take steps, right? You can leverage social media. A lot of organizations will do kind of, sample tweets and things that you can call out on specific issues that are important. You can write an op-ed or a letter to the editor, or even a blog post on your website. I often tell people, like, nonprofits are doing great events in their community all the time. Just invite your legislator, their staff, to those events, right? It doesn't have to be an extra thing you plan. Have them come see the work you do, whether it's virtual or in person, right? Extend those invitations, start to build those relationships, and just stay engaged in what's happening in your community, in the state, so that you can be a part of that conversation, because our policymakers are looking to us to kind of step up, but they oftentimes aren't gonna like walk over with the invitation. It's gonna require us asking for that seat at the table, for demanding to be there, so that we can share these stories, this data, this impact. And with that, I will turn it over to Ryan. I think that maybe a few questions have come in, and he's got some too to build on some of this advocacy and data that we've shared.
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to catch my breath. So that was dead set, exhausting mentally and physically, taking a lot of notes, but also feeling those acute pains of the sector, the anguish they've had over the past kind of 12 months. And, we'll get into that in a bit of depth. But I really want to thank you, Molly and Sarah, for the insight, also kind of providing options for people to plug in. I know that folks can do more and really link into your work. Is there any email addresses or like newsletters they can kind of get onto? Is there a link you can share with the group?
Yes, I will pop it in the chat, or if Sarah can. So there is a website that we host these reports that they live on, and there is an email address. So if you'd like to kind of stay involved to get more information on this, there's also a new page on the website that has specific advocacy updates. So we're posting legislative updates on that website specifically about nonprofit bills. And kind of this work has been a couple years in the making, and it's really kind of, we've been having conversations with people across the state, and we feel like there is this hunger, this desire to build out something, right? An initiative of an organization of the coalition that really tackles these issues. And so that's something that OneStar and United Ways of Texas is really committed to continuing to be in conversation with organizations about what that could look like. So we are hoping to kind of continue this and to build out what this statewide collaborative could look like.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing I appreciate about the presentation. Like I wrote down some quotes and it all had like a dot, dot, dot at the end, because you were encouraging people to stand up. You weren't calling them out, you were calling them in, which I found super important. So we had, if we come together, dot, 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 we have power in these numbers, dot, dot, dot. Like, I mean, that's cool. It's, you know, we can do a lot together. It's just reaching out and understanding that capacity doesn't have to be in that restrictive mindset. Like, I mean, these stats should just go to show how awesome and resilient our members are in AFP and members in the organizations that you represent as well. I mean, they all intersect too, right? Revenue equals capacity, you know, people improve capacity. So with that being said, we'll kind of go on a bit of a walk and a talk, as it were. I definitely want to, in terms of housekeeping, encourage people to raise questions in the Q&A function. The chat function is just good for sharing your love of Sarah and Molly and kind of reconnecting there. But for the Q&A, let's see if we can kind of structure some stuff. I really want to talk through the data and then kind of, you know, do a meaningful meander through to how we can advocate together. So Sarah, you talked about dazzling with data, right? So some of the most compelling I thought there was the workforce data. I say compelling because it really shows what we're up against when that fog of COVID lifts. So with that, I just want to add an extra data point that I found, and it's kind of been troubling me because I've seen a lot of it on LinkedIn, how we might be seeing the great resignation, right? So LinkedIn's economic graph found that 74% of the US is sheltering in job. So that means they're kind of waiting because they don't want to get themselves out in the marketplace. They're safe in the job. They're kind of de-risking their own circumstance, which is troubling for a number of reasons. But what do you think our nonprofit peers should be doing to ensure that our fundraising and public policy staff are still excited about their roles in the future in our organizations?
I think it's a great question, a great point to make. You know, I think now more than ever, our fundraisers and our public policy staff are critical to helping this sector rebuild what we may have lost through this pandemic. You know, that for us to be able to quickly move into delivering services and providing what we provide to so many as quickly as we can, it takes the incredible fundraisers and the incredible public policy folks that can take advantage of the opportunities that are here. So I think the more that the organization's leadership and board can recognize how important these roles are, and that by you know, really focusing in and honing in on how these team members and staff are critical to where the sector ends up, you know, 5-10 years from now, invests in them, supports them, and helps the rest of the organization team see how critical they are to the success. The higher likelihood that people will feel engaged, they'll feel valued, they'll see that they can be a part of the recovery for this sector. And, you know, in a way, you know, I don't take their individual organizations in the sector as a whole to a level that we may not have even imagined had the pandemic not hit.
Yeah, Molly, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I think Sarah hit a lot of keys, and I think that we've seen kind of the resiliency of nonprofits as a whole and kind of their adaptation to this new normal that it has been. And I think that a lot of us have seen that there's new ways to do things. There are ways to engage like this in policy and advocacy that maybe were on top of mind for people before. And I think that having avenues for this engagement really kind of helps our nonprofit staffs buy in more to that mission and can see some of the fruits of that work. So I think it's just an exciting opportunity to continue to build on some of the different ways that we've approached the work in ways that will support the sector going forward.
Yeah, I love that you kind of brought up opportunity, right? I think everyone's excited to kind of get back into it, to have those face-to-face meetings and to, link arms with everyone. But again, Sarah, you made a pertinent point, rebuild what we've lost. And one of those stats, which, I'm like, one, I was troubled with because it said Texas is 37th in volunteerism. But then seeing the gravity of the situation when nonprofits have shown that that's dropped a further 20% due to the pandemic to, was it like 54%? Is that 54, 57 around that area? So again, using that rebuild what we have lost kind of, lead in, Molly, I know United Ways pride themselves on a lot of that kind of volunteerism, especially when they're working with a lot of their corporate partners. So are you guys really expecting a bounce back in volunteering in the fall and more generally in 2022? I mean, are people going to be craving, being a part of something again? Like, is this going to be a renaissance of volunteerism?
I think that we are pretty kind of optimistic on that reality, Ryan, in terms of those rates. Returning back to normal is like the first step of that, right? Getting back kind of to those rates and then thinking about new ways to expand. I know that in our United Way network, we had a lot of people thinking creatively about these virtual volunteerisms and those different types of things. But I think that the real kind of, we're talking about that human interaction is going to be critical. So I know that already we have, United Ways and communities across the state that are already planning kind of summer-long campaigns of in-person events and of kind of this return to community involvement and engagement that I think kind of capitalizing on what you're talking about in terms of people have stepped up monetarily for the past year in a lot of ways, have been contributing with their dollars in any ways they can while we've been all asked to kind of shelter in place, but now looking to kind of leverage those maybe connections that they've made, those new organizations that they've found to support in these times and build out that kind of time commitment as well. So I think that we're excited to see kind of what that transition will look like and feel pretty confident that volunteerism will kind of reemerge.
Thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, I think I love the idea of a renaissance. And I think, I would challenge nonprofits that I think if we can see kind of a great rebound in renaissance and volunteerism, we can. I think it's on nonprofits to kind of recognize what volunteers need and might need and want now, which I think might be different than before. I think virtual opportunities were, not very available before, and I think that's something that people are going to want going forward. So for organizations to be able to provide that can really help activate a lot of people who otherwise might not be able to volunteer. And I think also kinds of volunteer opportunities. People want to have a voice. I think people have experienced such challenges. If we can tap into kind of that grassroots interest that I know is out there to help individuals come together, to help volunteers advocate for your organization and for the issues that matter to them. If we can create that space, I think we're going to see a whole lot of activity that beyond what we had seen before the pandemic and the other events of this past more than a year now.
Yeah, it's exciting. I am definitely looking forward to getting back involved. I mean, I moved here like 3 weeks before everything shut down, so I've actually never visited Austin. I just live in it. So hopefully those opportunities will come thick and fast. But yeah, you've got my name and my address, so feel free to reach out. In terms of the last question around like the big stats component, before we kind of get onto the advocacy and really honor that kind of legislative action day title that we've been built under. In the presentation, again, you mentioned 51% of Texas nonprofits were established after the year 2000. What are your predictions for the next 20 years, especially with the uptick in population from the last census and I guess the continued migration? Like the buzz around Austin is palpable. I mean, my friends in Australia are going, oh, you live in Austin. I'm like, well, I don't think you even knew what that was. But then Elon Musk comes in and all of a sudden everything's changed, right? And I guess as a result of the census, we've got another 2 federal reps to lobby too. So where do you see the next 20 years for nonprofits in Texas?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first if that's okay, Molly.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think that the trend is shocking. The slide that I showed that shows just 2004 compared to 2014 per capita. So, per capita, the growth out of nonprofit establishment what am I trying to say here? It outpaced the growth of people in our state. And if that continues, that is one mighty sector. I think more isn't always better, right? I think we want to make sure that it's a well-coordinated sector that can work together to best meet the needs of people. And I think, again, it kind of comes to the nonprofit sector to come together and decide what is in the best interest of our state. I think if we have some infrastructure at the state level to help make it easy and clear to organizations that are considering, or people that are considering starting nonprofits, to better see and know what is already out there available, and to be able to link in and up with organizations that are already engaged in the work rather than starting offshoot organizations. I think that could be beneficial to the sector. But that requires us having that data available to share out, and actively targeting, folks that are wanting to start organizations, to make sure that they're just armed with the good information needed to go into it, knowing what the challenges are, knowing who their partners are, and knowing how to provide good quality services. So I think what I would love to see, rather than the same pace of number of nonprofits, to see just this dramatic pace and increase of collaboration, of us working together as really one big network, supporting each other on our various issue areas, and really identifying the issues that are common to all of us.
Yeah, I think all of that is really right, Sarah. I think too, we're going to just see a lot of kind of less traditional structures kind of popping up in terms of talking about how there are so many. And I know that number seems really big, but also Texas is really big and our population is massive. So I think you'll continue to see a lot of kind of the grassroots organizations, the hyper local ones, pop up, because we know that the sector hasn't necessarily always kind of fully represented the diversity of Texas in terms of addressing the needs of low-income population, of children and families, of LGBTQ plus communities. So I think you'll see a lot more potentially initiatives or offshoots of bigger organizations that are focused specifically on certain issues or certain neighborhoods and community-based things. I think we'll continue to see that happen, and that stat of 10% have an operating budget of 50,000 or less. Like that, I think that will continue to happen. And so to think too about how we provide support for organizations that have been kind of outside of the traditional hierarchy of nonprofits or the traditional kind of coalitions, to really broaden that support and say, very small nonprofits need something different than like big kind of institutionalized nonprofits. And we think that there's a way to kind of be able to meet multiple needs kind of in one still kind of collective voice, but it's going to be a challenge. And so I think kind of thinking through what the sector will look like in those different structures is exciting, but it'll also, I think, provoke some interesting conversations for all of us moving forward.
Yeah, I definitely think the conversation is something that's to be had. And I think organisations that you both represent are going to be ones that are leading that charge as well. So again, appreciate all you do. But shifting gears now to kind of the more advocacy parts, I really want to kind of ground into this part because, we really want people to get more involved. So I want to tap into all the great stuff and all the fun you've had, either on the Capitol or kind of on the Hill in DC and stuff like that. So do you guys want to just provide an example of an advocacy campaign that really impacted your organization, current or former, and the communities you serve? Like what clicked, what didn't work, What would you do differently if you could do it again? Yeah, just add some color to the subject. I think that that's the great energy that comes from the nonprofit sector is, again, the tactics vis-a-vis the big goal, right, of legislative change.
Yeah, I can kind of hop in first on this one and just talk. I think one that always comes to mind is kind of the universal pre-K campaign that has been going on for a long time in the state of Texas, and had a big win in 2019 for sure. That was multiple years and sessions in the making to kind of get to that point. And I think I was kind of at a different organization. United Ways of Texas was very involved kind of in the pre-K work when I was working specifically with an education organization at the time. So also kind of really interested in the pre-K work. I think what you often see at the Capitol is that it requires a really big tent in terms of coalition partners, and often that takes a long time to build the trust and the expertise and the partners to make that happen. And so you saw something like that come together in 2019, where we had philanthropy, we had funders who knew this was really important, we had advocacy groups, we had child care centers, right? We had parents, we had workforce, like companies who know that how important pre-K is to their, to parents who need to be at work. Like, we had kind of this confluence of all of these voices that were finally on the same page, pushing for the same type of thing. So I think that kind of speaks to, one, the power of a really big tent that's often necessary to get things done in the Texas legislature, but also to having a structure that can help everyone have those same set of messages. And I think that's like kind of a big learning that we're seeing right now with the nonprofit sector, is that we might have a big tent, but some of those structures to make sure we have the same message is what I think is the next step for that, to make sure that no matter if you are a funder or a service provider or a client that's receiving some type of services, that we all kind of understand what those big messages are, and then it's beating from the grass tops and the grassroots at the same time. I think people always like, which one is more important? It's like, it's both and everything else, right? It's like, you need the stories, the groundswell. There's 150 members just in the House. That's a lot of offices to hit, a lot of people to talk to, a lot of people who come from a lot of parts of this state that have different experiences. But then there's also, you need key influencers as well. You need the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, the governor to really be bought in to an advocacy campaign like that as well. So I think just being able to build that really big tent, to find those unlikely partners sometimes, that really kind of help make the case for things, and then try not to get swept away by the politics of anything that can often take you down. So
Sarah, there's no doubt with all those stats you have that you've busted down some kind of doors of elected officials and given them a reason to fall on your side of the decision making. So do you have a story to share?
I can, in all honesty, the OneStar Foundation is still very new at engaging in advocacy, especially at the state level. Now, where we have been active is at the federal level, and mainly tied to AmeriCorps. So without going into all the details, our organization is Texas's State Commission for National Service, and we manage about $18 million in the federal funds that come through our organization and are given in grants to nonprofits and AmeriCorps members. So we, I think, to kind of echo what Molly said, it was incredible. It's been incredible to see the infrastructure that has been put in place by state commissions across the country and advocates for national service to come together to effectively advocate for the programs. So most recently, a really big win for AmeriCorps was in the American Rescue Plan. AmeriCorps National Agency received $1 billion in funding as part of the American Rescue Plan. Now, OneStar's role in that, our board, Mary Grace, our policy committee chair, who's listening into this right now, and a number of our board members participated in holding meetings, sharing stats. we did educate and help activate some folks in our neck of the woods, but the broader infrastructure, I mean, the amount of work that all the state commissions do in coming together, developing plans and proposals, and it's not just the commissions, it's the other organizations that are actively engaged and utilize national service members for the work that they do. There's 2 national advocacy organizations that we're all members of, and it was really only through a lot of hard work and effort and coordination that something like this was possible, and it really incredible to just be a part of it and learn a lot.
That's awesome. We've actually got a question from the floor. Also remember, folks, you can add something in the Q&A. What groups exist through Texas to enable nonprofits to plug and play around advocacy?
Sure, I think that the kind of the clearest ways to do that in Texas are around kind of specific issue areas. So there is a statewide coalition of nonprofits that work together on digital literacy and inclusion, right? Digital Texas. There is a statewide fair lending association that really works on issues of fair lending and payday ordinances and those types of things. There's Feeding Texas, which deals with that. So I think that there are organizations and a lot of nonprofits, I would say these, even since I've been around the legislature, like really stepped up involvement in these coalitions, have been really great support partners to advocates at the Capitol, really being able to lean on them to provide data, stories, direct touches to local legislators on these key issues. So I think that there are a lot of different ways to engage. There are a couple of really big state think tanks that do a lot of this work that nonprofits plug into. But I think what we've found is that people are really hungry for those like ability to plug in, right? To be able to say like, I'd love to get you weekly updates. And then if you have a call to action, I'd love the talking points for the email to send, right? And there are organizations that do that, but not for kind of our sector specific work, not for, making contracting easier for nonprofits to engage in, especially small ones, or data transparency, or, disaster relief supports that include nonprofits as well as small businesses, things like that. And that's, I think, really the hope of OneStar of United Ways of Texas, is to start thinking about what could that infrastructure look like, to where nonprofits could, right now we're on the kind of informed stage of this, right? We're sharing updates, we're letting people know what's happening, but I think a natural next step is to start thinking about what that could look like specifically for our sector in terms of having those opportunities, because I know that's something that we've heard over and over again, people are really hungry for and interested in.
Yeah, Sarah, anything to add in that one?
No, I think Molly really captured it all. We know there's a need out there, and I think we're interested in working with folks to figure out how that can best be filled, to sign up for the newsletter on the Texas Nonprofits website, to just kind of stay updated on where we're at, and tell us what you feel like your organization in the sector needs. What would be most helpful to you?
Well, being someone new to Texas and having the great pleasure of working with you both on this presentation, knowing that you're there in those leadership roles, and also the people that are on the webinar today, if they know you're there, there's great things to come with your support. So do you have any kind of closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the group?
I mean, Sarah, I'll start, and I'll just say kind of on the advocacy, the engagement piece of it is that it's been really exciting to see, even in a session like this where, access has been difficult to the Capitol, that there's been a lot going on, that how many nonprofits are really stepping up and sharing stories of impact that are really getting involved in this advocacy space, that are maybe shedding some of the fears and some of those kind of self-imposed barriers we often have about getting involved in in the advocacy world, and just to encourage people to dive in wherever feels most comfortable to start. Maybe it is by just getting updates on specific issues. Maybe it is having more of a social media presence. Maybe it's reaching out to your legislator after this session and asking him to come by and share the work that he's done this session. Whatever kind of those first steps are, I think that relationship building, that kind of is key to all of this. So whatever your organization feels comfortable with, taking those first few steps and knowing there's a lot of other organizations out there taking those steps too. And there's support networks kind of all around these issue areas. And there are statewide partners that are happy to kind of be a sounding board and support for that work as well. But we know that without the systems change, that it makes the work of individual nonprofits much harder on the ground, so that we've got to kind of keep our eyes on both places. And there are a lot of organizations like ours and OneStar Foundation that do some of that kind of systems level look a little bit more, and are happy to kind of be supportive in any way we can.
And I'll just say, stay tuned, and we're really excited to continue talking with folks, brainstorming, figuring out how we can work together. I'm really excited to participate in the rest of this AFP event, and really want to thank AFP for seeing the value and importance of this and bringing folks together. And a big thank you to Ryan for moderating our discussion today, and hats off to Molly, who is doing incredible work, and all the team at United Ways on behalf of the sector. And yeah, just big thanks all around to everyone.
Sarah Richards, Molly Weiner, thanks for your time. You're a testament to the sector. And to everyone, thanks for participating in this session. Session 3 will be kicking off in like 15 minutes. And the title of that session will be How Foundations Engage in Advocacy. So I just want to, again, thank everyone for participating. I want to thank those that made this happen: OneStar Foundation, Philanthropy Southwest, the United Ways of Texas, AFP Austin, and all the other AFP chapters throughout the state. Bria for helping get this all together and make us look like we know how to be technical and stuff. And also the Legislative Affairs Chair, Catherine Herder-Irvin, that kind of, corralled all those cats to get it done. So appreciate everything that you've shared today, and appreciate everything you're doing in the field. Fundraising is a hard task, policy is a hard task, and it's often a thankless endeavor, as it were. So I really want to put on record my appreciation of everything you do. So get out there and keep on moving the community in a much better direction. Thanks everyone, thanks for your time.